40,000 years ago, if you walked across this planet, you wouldn't have been alone. You might have crossed paths with humans, but not quite like us. Some shorter and stronger, some with wide chests and heavy bones, built to survive winters that would kill us. Some living on islands, evolving into something almost unbelievable. We weren't the only humans. We were just one answer among many, and somehow the only one still here. Every other human species is gone, and we still don't fully know why. No single battle, no single disaster, just a slow disappearance, species by species, until only we were left. Start with Homo erectus, because they're the one that should humble us most. They showed up around 2 million years ago. Long legs, shorter arms, a body built for covering ground. They were probably the first humans to walk out of Africa and keep going, spreading across Asia while the rest of the human family was still figuring things out back home. And they didn't just survive. They lasted for over 1 million years, through shifting climates, through ice ages, through landscapes that kept changing underneath them. They made stone tools, they hunted, they scavenged, they adapted. For a stretch of time so long it barely fits in your head, that was enough. The last known Homo erectus fossils come from Java, dated somewhere around 117,000 years ago. By then, the world had changed around them. Other humans had appeared, forests had shifted, animals had moved, and Homo erectus, after surviving longer than our entire species has existed, quietly disappeared. We don't know exactly why. Maybe their remaining populations got too isolated. Maybe the world changed faster than they could follow. But the lesson is right there. Surviving for 1 million years doesn't protect you from the next 10,000. Then there's Homo naledi, and they're unsettling in a completely different way. Found deep inside cave systems in South Africa, passages so narrow that the researchers who discovered them had to be specifically small enough to squeeze through. Homo naledi had a brain roughly a third the size of ours. Their features were strange, a mix of ancient and modern that didn't fit neatly anywhere on the family tree. Small hands, curved fingers, feet built for walking upright, an anatomy that looked almost designed by committee, pulling from different eras of human evolution at once. What makes them strange isn't their body. It's what they apparently did with their dead. Evidence from deep inside those caves suggests they may have been deliberately placing bodies there, returning to the same dark, nearly unreachable chambers over and over. That kind of behavior, caring for the dead, treating a body as something that mattered, we always assumed required a bigger brain, a more advanced mind. Homo naledi is a quiet argument against that assumption. Brain size didn't make them safe either. Neanderthals are the ones most people think they know. For a long time, the image was simple, hunched, slow, brutish, cave people who grunted at each other and lost. That picture is wrong, and it's worth taking a second to actually replace it. They were stocky and powerful, with wide chests, thick bones, and large noses built to warm freezing air before it hit their lungs. Their bodies weren't primitive, they were specialized, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of Ice Age survival. And they weren't just surviving in the cold, they were thriving in it. They hunted large animals at close range, the kind of hunting where you can't miss and stay alive. Researchers who've studied their bone injuries found the same patterns you see in modern rodeo riders. Fractures and trauma from being too close to something much bigger and stronger than you. They did that regularly because that's how they ate. They used fire. They made tools, some of them surprisingly refined. There's evidence they cared for injured members of their group, individuals with serious disabilities who couldn't have survived alone but did, which means someone kept them alive. They used pigments, possibly for body decoration. They buried their dead. At least sometimes. These weren't animals operating on instinct. They were people, running on a different set of answers to the same problems we faced. So what went wrong? Part of it was structure. Neanderthals lived in small, scattered groups, and small groups are fragile in ways that are easy to underestimate. One bad winter, a disease moving through a community of 30 people, a birth rate that dropped slightly below replacement for a few generations. Any of those things, by themselves, might not seem fatal, but string enough of them together across isolated populations that can't easily reconnect, and you start losing groups one by one, with no way to replace them. Ancient DNA has added another layer to this. Some late Neanderthal populations showed low genetic diversity, meaning they'd already been through bottlenecks, already shrinking, already vulnerable, before Homo sapiens pushed into their territories in significant numbers. The arrival of a competing species didn't necessarily trigger a sudden collapse. It may have just been the last pressure on populations that were already bending. Climate kept making things worse. The world during that period wasn't stable. It cycled through cold phases and warmer ones, shifting where animals lived, what plants grew, where water flowed. Neanderthal groups that had spent generations learning one landscape would suddenly find it rearranged. And then, into all of that, came us. Not necessarily smarter, not necessarily stronger, but more connected, more able to move knowledge and people across long distances. The end wasn't a war. It was 1,000 small losses that added up to nothing left. Now, the Denisovans are a different kind of story entirely. We didn't even know they existed until 2010, when a fragment of a finger bone pulled from Denisova Cave in Siberia turned out to carry DNA that didn't match Neanderthals or modern humans. An entirely separate human group, identified from a piece of bone small enough to hold between two fingers. For years, that and a handful of teeth were essentially all we had. What we do know from genetics is enormous, though. Denisovans ranged across a huge stretch of Asia, from Siberia down through the Tibetan Plateau, possibly into Southeast Asia and beyond. Their physical fossil record is nearly empty, but their genetic footprint is not. Populations across Oceania and parts of Asia carry Denisovan ancestry today, and Tibetans carry a specific gene variant linked to surviving at high altitude that traces back to Denisovan-related humans. A group that left almost no bones behind is still, in a measurable way, helping living people breathe in thin mountain air. They were gone as a distinct population around 40,000 years ago, absorbed in some places, outnumbered in others, their range possibly too wide and their numbers too thin to hold together when the pressure built. Their extinction is the foggiest chapter in this whole story. Almost no fossils, no tools we can point to with certainty, just fragments and code slowly giving up their secrets. Then there's Homo floresiensis, and honestly, they're the one that breaks your brain a little. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, scientists found the remains of a tiny ancient human, about a meter tall, small brain, small body. So small and so strange that when the findings were first published, a serious portion of the scientific community assumed there had to be a mistake. Maybe diseased modern humans, maybe a developmental disorder affecting a small population. The evidence kept saying otherwise. These were a separate species, shaped by the island they lived on. Islands do strange things to evolution. Cut a population off from the mainland and the normal rules stop applying. Large animals shrink because there's less food and less space. Small animals grow because the predators that kept them in check are gone. Everything recalibrates around what the island can actually support. Homo floresiensis may be the most extreme example of this process anywhere in the human family. A lineage that shrank over generations into something that barely looked like the humans it descended from. And they survived. That's the part worth sitting with. They lived alongside Komodo dragons, giant birds, and dwarf elephants called stegodon, on an island where almost nothing about the ecosystem was predictable. They made stone tools. They figured it out. The fossils at Liangbua date roughly between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, and stone tools associated with them push as late as around 50,000 years ago, right when modern humans were beginning to move through that part of the world. Then they were gone. Maybe the island's environment shifted. Maybe their prey declined. Maybe a volcanic eruption destabilized the ecosystem enough to push a small population past the point of recovery. Maybe Homo sapiens arriving added just enough pressure. On a small island, none of those things need to be catastrophic on a global scale. A chain of local problems is enough. Less water, fewer animals, one bad stretch of years, and a species that had been holding on for tens of thousands of years simply stops. That's what makes Homo floresiensis feel different from the others. They weren't competing for a continent. They were just trying to hold one island, and even that wasn't safe. But here's what the fossils can't tell us. Some of the most recent genetic research pulled from the DNA of modern West African populations contains traces of an unknown human group, one with no fossils attached to it. No bones, no tools, no cave site. Just a genetic signal that shows up in living people and points back to something that interbred with our ancestors somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 years ago. An entire human lineage, gone so completely that the only evidence it existed is a faint echo in someone's DNA today. The fossil record was always an incomplete picture. These ghost populations are a reminder of exactly how incomplete. There may have been branches on this family tree that we will never find, never name, never understand. Species that lived and adapted and disappeared without leaving a single bone behind. So what actually separated us from all of them? The easy answer is intelligence, and it collapses almost immediately. Neanderthals were clearly capable of complex thought. Denisovans adapted to some of the most extreme environments on the planet. Homo erectus navigated changing landscapes across multiple continents for over 1 million years. Homo floresiensis built a life in a world that had no business supporting them. None of them failed because they weren't smart enough. The more honest answer is connection. Homo sapiens seem to have been unusually good at building and maintaining wide social networks. Not just small bands of related individuals, but loose webs stretching across long distances, linking groups that rarely saw each other. Tools and ideas and information could travel hundreds of miles. If one community collapsed, the knowledge didn't necessarily die with it. If a region became impossible to live in, people could move toward other groups rather than just running out of options alone. That kind of networked culture doesn't just help in good times. It acts as a buffer when things go wrong. Isolated populations absorb shocks until they can't. Connected ones root around them. But connection alone didn't guarantee anything. Luck was real. Geography mattered. Being in the right place with enough people at the right moment mattered. We probably weren't inevitable,